Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
People of Reddit, what's the creepiest encounter you've had with a complete stranger that still gives you chills? Episode 9.
Plymouth, UK, back in 1999, I was 10 years old with my brother, 8 years, and we were playing out on the street which had no exit, only one way in and out. A car with a middle-aged couple inside came in and asked me for directions. After I explained to them where I thought it was, they asked if I could get in the car and show them. Immediately my alarms went off and I remembered all of the adults/teachers that told me never to get into a car with strangers. We ran in to let our parents know, and by the time we came back out the car was gone. I've always felt that was the closest I have ever come to kidnapping. When my sister and I were about 18 and 13, we walked to our local shop at about 10 p.m., and the streets were deadly silent. As we walked down the street that the shop was on, we saw two guys in hoodies standing at the side of the road, completely still, staring us down. We continued walking past them on the opposite side of the road, and as we did, their heads slowly followed us and their eyes stayed on us, but everything from the necks down were entirely still. Rigor mortis kind of still. We went in the shop, craped out, got what we needed, left to walk home, and they were still there. Did the exact same thing as we walked back the opposite way. To this day we have no idea what that was about. My dad and I had just got done seeing a movie at our local theater. He said he had to go to the bathroom, so I waited on a bench nearby. I started scrolling through my phone and saw something moving in front of me. I looked up and saw a grown man standing in front of me. He was trying to act like he wasn't looking at me, trying to be mysterious and stuff, but I could definitely tell. Luckily, I had dealt with people like this before. I put on a blank slate face. Raised my chin to look confident and looked him up and down. And started picking at my nails. I didn't get back on my phone. Because I didn't want him to think my guard was down. He then walked away when he saw my dad walk out of the bathroom. I was 16 and it was winter. I used to go to the gym at 7 to 8 p.m. and would walk 15 miles from my house. In winter it gets dark by 6 p.m. I was passing by when a random guy talks to me. I used to be naive, so I engaged in conversation, clueless. The guy tried to sell me a pair of Reebok shoes and I declined, then he tried lowering the price, which I declined again. He then told me that he was gay and was looking for fun, and he found me cute and would gift me the shoes if I had relations with him. I declined again. He then proceeds to call me a wild cat and runs away, tripping in the railroad tracks, trying to jump over them and disappearing, groaning and cursing. Enough to say that I changed my gym hours and path. I never saw him again. I'm convinced I walked home with an extremely dangerous and delusional person. He was harassing women on the train home and I decided to talk to him so he would leave the women alone. He instantly became very friendly with me. I knew he was high from his behavior, so he was easy to converse with if you agreed with everything he said. Walking from the train station he starts opening up about his past and it is bleak. I won't go into details, but just know this was a broken man starting from parental trauma. Where things started to turn, and I realized what I was dealing with wasn't just a drunk/druggie, was when he started quoting various Bibles. In particular blood ritual sacrifices as a way to cleanse his soul. I should also mention he had a comb in his hand that he was playing with, running his finger down, whilst saying all this. He also started talking about fun a lot. And how Trump was going to save him. I honestly thought I was going to get stabbed and was ready to bolt. I walked behind him so I could keep an eye on him and didn't let him get behind me. Eventually I picked my moment and just ran when his back was turned. I was bartending and this older couple, a lady and dude in their mid-50s, rubbed me the wrong way. They were polite but had off vibes immediately. I tried to brush off the feeling but they ended up acting weirder and weirder. I end up kicking them out because they got touchy with younger dudes and I heard the woman ask them if they wanted cocaine. They threw a little bit of a fit but ended up leaving. The woman tried calling the cops on me for kicking them out but they still left pretty quickly. A month later, both of their pictures pop up on my feed. They were arrested for human trafficking. Apparently, they'd lure younger guys back to their apartment, and coerce them into literal children, and making them pay for it, or else. Wild. Glad my gut feeling was right. Working at a grocery store I got asked where things are all the time. One morning this rougher-looking slightly heavier-set older but clean-as man approached me with a determined focus in his eyes, fixated on my face. He said he needed help finding the pickles, and asked multiple times in one sentence where he might find the pickles. He can never remember where the pickles are. Never looked away from me. Catching on immediately, I flatly told him he would find them on aisle 10. I was hiding how uncomfortable I was. He smiled big and thanked me profusely, then reached out and caressed my shoulder slow and gentle, smiling right at me for too long. Finally I again flatly respond with a "You're welcome," and took the opportunity to book it and get as far away as possible. He was still staring at me. A few minutes later I'm still just trying to do my job and of course we cross paths again. He never once went to aisle 10, never grabbed any pickles, and he just stared and smiled. For a while he just stopped in the main walkway and stared at me. I hid in the stock room for a while. Thankfully never saw the man again. I was about 21/22 m.
I live pretty close to work, only a 25-minute walk, but I usually start at 6 a.m. and because of daylight savings it's still dark then. My street is about maybe 500 meters long and has 4 streetlights on the whole thing. I started walking to work a few weeks ago, about 200 meters from my house. A car passed me which was weird. It was about 5:30 a.m. There should be no cars down my street. It's dimly lit and pretty much only older people live there. No work/jobs are on it either. It only makes sense for people to go out to go to work, for example. They drove past me real slow and had their high beams on so I couldn't see a color/plate until I turned around after they passed me. It was a darkish car with one of those spare tires on the back door of the car. They chucked a UI and parked on the street facing my direction. I kept walking. The next part of the street is about 150 meters long and no streetlights and no houses, just trees and almost pitch black. I got to the end of that and a car was once again slowly driving down the street with the high beams on. I walked 50 meters more until there was a street that was between my street and the main road, which connects to the bridge that crosses over my street. And I passed that and the car stopped in the middle of that intersection. I kept walking and I could see the lights get bigger and brighter, meaning that the car was getting closer to me. I bolted down the street. It ended with a cul-de-sac, crossed the grass and ran across the road without looking into the bridge's walkway and turned to see that the car was gone. It didn't go back up the street because it was straight and I would have seen it, which meant it would have had to go into the side street, which turned into the bridge I was on. After I made this realization, a dark blue car with a tire on the back came from that direction and onto the bridge. It could have been 3 separate cars each time, and who knows, maybe all, possible. 3 of them had completely innocent intentions, but it's not the first time something like this has happened. For context, I'm a 16-year-old girl, and I'm very aware that if someone tried to hurt/murder/kidnap me, there's probably not a lot I can do about it.
Was a kid playing in the field behind my house? An old woman we didn't know who just seemed like she was on a walk came up to me and my friend and offered us a sweet. I, being an obnoxiously sensible and anxious little 8-year-old, politely declined because I shouldn't take sweets from strangers. She got slightly offended and tried to pressure me into having it, saying it wouldn't do me any harm, to which I again politely declined. She got more and more angry and started demanding that we take the sweet, so we again declined and started walking away. So she began chasing us. And we sprinted for like 10 straight minutes, cut back into the estate, and then ran a wide circle all the way back home. Her being an old woman, we lost her really quickly and we never saw her again, but that stuff was terrifying at the time. 11. Used to live in an upstairs flat in a nice enough area. A few years in, some questionable folk moved in 5 doors up. I heard from the neighbors that there were drugs involved and it was a bit of a halfway house for random lodgers. Anyway, one night, I remembered I needed to take the bin out of the back garden as it was rubbish collection the next day. Unfortunately for me, it was about 12 a.m., which just makes all this worse. Went down the stairs, opened my back door, and the garden gate was wide open. Now this is odd because the gate itself is made of hardwood and incredibly stiff to open, especially in winter time, so I know it didn't just open of its own accord, and I certainly didn't do it. I waited for a couple of seconds and talked myself out of the scariest. No sooner than I took a step out into my backyard, a man popped up out of nowhere. He was dressed like a homeless person. This is not to sound prejudiced, he just looked a lot like the homeless population that reside in my area. I kid you not, this man stared at me for 2 whole minutes without saying anything. Neither did I say anything. I was literally frozen with dread. All of a sudden he says, "I'm looking for number 68. I proceeded to tell him with all of a wisp in my throat that this is number 58, he needed to be 5 doors down, halfway/Sabo house. The guy walked out of my yard, but still stayed in the way of the gate. He was just frick standing there staring at me. It was the most terrifying thing. He asked me again where he needed to be. I told him, 5 doors down, and pointed that way. He said thanks and left. So I put the bin outside, yanked that back gate shut and legged it back up into the flat. I was on window watch for about 2 hours after that. Not even a few days after, I came home from work at around 12 a.m. to a raging fire in the back lane. My back garden lead out to that back lane, and when I tell you it was this close to burning my fences and gate down. The people moved out a couple of days after that. My big sister and I were only maybe 10 and I was 7, and we went to a flea market mall 3 towns down from my actual home, and my parents were buying cods I think, and my sister and I walked to another stand that had white little dresses for like communion. We didn't know that we just saw pretty dresses, and from the corner of my eye I see a man reading a newspaper while getting his shoe shined and staring us down. I try to hide behind more dresses and grab her hand to come with me and still see him trying to get a view of us. I still remember vividly what he wore. Mid-40s white. Dark sunglasses and a green hat with leather shoes and a beige suit jacket with jeans. The most off-putting I've ever felt, and as soon as I see him get up he looks right at us and starts walking towards us almost mad. I grab her and we run for stands down and hide behind paintings. I remember my heart beating so fast out of my chest I thought he was going to take her more than I was scared for myself. To this day I don't think she remembers, but I remember because I didn't want to go there anymore and my parents always wondered why. A woman in my apartment complex would say hello to me here and there, and then it started to get into conversations. She would talk about her new job, car, etc. It's clear that I have things to do and am exhausted still wearing my scrubs. One conversation she was getting really pushy that we should go out for coffee sometime. I think we really should. She says. Her tone changed and she mentioned about leaving her number on my car. Later on I got the piece of paper with her phone number, apartment unit, name, etc. I just cannot associate with strangers, and working nights has limited my social time. I'm also a homebody. I'm a 35-year-old female, got nothing in common with this woman. The woman is in her 50s and lives with her adult daughter. I really don't know what her aim or intention was. But her being pushy and changing her tone creeped me out.
One time when I left my dormitory, there was a guy standing at the corner that looked kind of creepy. He spoke to me in a language I didn't understand. Instead of ignoring him, I said, "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying." He then said in German, "I live in Germany, hey. Where are you from?" "Germany, really? Not Turkey?" "No." "Okay. Would you like to smoke a blunt with me?" No thanks, I have to get to a class." And when I left, he touched my cheek and said something like, "Maybe later, then." I was so grossed out by him touching my face. I saw him again a few days later, and while passing him on the stairs, he whispered, "You're looking really hot." Never saw him again, but thinking about that still gives me the creeps.
It wasn't an encounter. But it still scares me. One night I was returning home from my shop. It was around and my house was pretty far away, so I was slacking off that day and decided to ride my bike slowly. A few miles later I was stuck in some traffic where I had to inform my mother that I'll be a little late. This huge dude was following me since I came from the shop. I just noticed because every time I stopped he stopped. So just to be sure I stopped 5 times in a row to do some stupid stuff. For the 6th time he stopped ahead of me so that I shouldn't know about him, but I was on a diversion and turned on my vehicle and sped off. Even if he wanted to chase me, it would take a long U-turn for him to come reach me. It still scares me to go from that road daily. If I hadn't noticed this bullet, I don't know what would have happened. In 1998 I was 22 years old and I was driving alone in rural Missouri outside of Kansas City with no cell phone. I am female and white and it was dusk. I also had a slight build, so I could not defend myself. I came to a complete stop at a stop sign. There was a police car behind me that turned on its lights. I thought they wanted to drive past me, so I pulled over. But they pulled up behind me, and the officer that came to my window seemed very surprised that I was a young white college student, maybe because my car was quite old and junky and the local college is a private institution, so many of the students there have nice cars. He asked me if I knew why he had pulled me over. I said I had absolutely no idea. He said, "Well, why don't you get out of your vehicle right now and I will show you why I pulled you over." Something about the way he said it and stepped back from the door made my blood run cold, and I instantly became terrified, and my heart started racing. I thought this man is going to assault me at the side of the road in the middle of nowhere in the dark, in the mud, and he's a police officer with a gun. I felt like I had to open the door. I was shaking. My chest was hot and my airway started to feel tight. I got out, and I thought my knees were going to completely buckle and he'd have to drag me, but my knees held. Then he takes me to the rear of the vehicle and he positions me so that I am between the bumper and him with my back slightly to him, and he pointed the tail light and he says, "You see this? Well, you've turned off your engine and your lights, but if you hadn't, you would see that this tail light is burnt out." I mumbled piteously that I would have that tail light fixed immediately, and then I had no idea that it was out. He had a partner, who ran my ID, and I have no idea what their arrangement was, but the guy was staying pretty far away from the interaction his partner was having with me. At first, I thought that this man must have been clueless about making me feel that he could and would assault me at the side of the road, but later I wondered if maybe he knew exactly what he was doing, that he was doing it on purpose, and then he enjoyed it. It seems like that is more likely. The guy was a dick about an old license plate I had in the back seat that belonged to the former owner of the vehicle I was in. The state had changed plate design recently, and he was a dick about me putting on my seatbelt, making it seem like he thought I hadn't been wearing my seatbelt when he pulled me over even though I had, and he was just really throwing his weight around. I get my ID and insurance and registration info back and he let me go. By the time I realized that I should report him, the police department had no record of me having ever been pulled over by the Liberty Police Department. I hope other people reported him and me hope he was disciplined because of it, but knowing police departments, I doubt it. I was a really bad teenager and used to sneak out. One early morning, I was coming home from a party. I lived in a gated community, so I had to get dropped off at the front of my neighborhood and walk to the back where my house was. I get out of the car and a security guard comes to me. He was huge and petite, 16-year-old, 5 feet 4 inches, 100 pounds. Me froze. He asked if I lived here. I said yes, and he got closer. He convinced me to get closer to the guard house, stupid I know, and asked if my parents knew where I was and started leering toward me. I ran off like a bat out of hell and didn't sneak out for a month. Definitely got the vibe he was going to attack me. Wouldn't say creepiest, but definitely strangest. I was waiting for the bus home after a day in college. It was a mid-afternoon in November. This is in Ireland, where it can be a little darker at this time of year. Not too dark, however, but anyways, there was this dude. He was approaching young guys looking for fist bumps. Definitely sus, but I kept my distance, as I recognized this guy from a previous encounter me and my friend had. Originally had thought he was a harmless guy, but he was at this stop going up to any schoolboy or college student asking for a fist bump. I decided not to intervene unless he tried anything really bad like touching these boys. The next thing he does is demented. He starts picking up cigarette butts and starts smoking them. Like he starts lighting them. As far as I know, this guy wasn't homeless. He definitely had money, but here he was putting butts into his mouth and smoking them away.
I was 19 years old and was recently moved out of my parents and living in a new town. I was walking home from work one day, no traffic or people around as usual, small town, when suddenly this car on the opposite side of the ride drives by, then rather quickly makes a U-turn so he's on the side of the road next to the sidewalk I was on. He slowly drives up next to me, keeping the car in pace with my walking. I'm getting creepy vibes and trying to ignore it, but think maybe he just needs directions or something. I look over and he rolls the window down. I ask if he needed help and he just stares at me. It was an older man with white hair, and his eyes are what got me. They were blank and almost dead. He just kept staring without saying a word and proceeded to move all the things off his passenger seat before quietly asking, "Need a ride?" I politely declined and lied that my house wasn't far. He speeds off without a single word. It's hard to explain, but the vibe I got scared me so bad I didn't even go home, too afraid he might be lurking around and see where I live. This was back in 2015, and I still get the creeps thinking about what could have happened if I got in the car. I was 18 homes for summer break from college, working as a hostess at a restaurant a 10-minute walk away. I was walking home at 11 p.m. and I could see my house. A car came by revving its engine and the guys inside were whistling and catcalling. I put 911 on my phone, prepared to dial. They sped away. Then they came back. I didn't want them to know where I lived, but I also wanted to be home. I ran home, terrified. In college, I was hanging out with my best friend, my BF, and her BF. Her BF invited some people he knew. They were cutest to the waitress at the restaurant and said they had a gun. I didn't have my own car, and the BF was driving all of us. He drove us to an apartment his parents apparently owned, and they did drug deals, and I tried not to have a panic attack or piss them off. When at the same hostess job when I was 18, I had a homeless drunk guy who used to hang around, but once he got extra drunk and started saying crazy stuff, so my manager let me go inside, and she threatened to call the police. Also on my first day, the other hostesses told me to watch out for this 32 server with 2 kids and tell him I was 17 so he wouldn't mess with me. Well, that first day he came up and I'm a terrible liar, so I said I was 18 and he immediately asked me if I wanted to go smoke with him after work. He ended up quitting in a rage, throwing around tables and using the kitchen microphone to announce how gross the kitchen was to the customers. Lol. Bullet dodged there. I was in Walmart doing my weekly shop and an older weirdo with a dangly earring asked me where the guacamole was. I was not sure, but I think it's in the front by the produce. He asked me to walk him to the area. I said I can't do that, but I pointed him there. 10 minutes later, he bumps into me in the meat section and asks again about guacamole. I laugh, and try to get away. He keeps calling me a pretty girl and trying to get me to show him where it is. Absolutely not. My speed run to my car that night was extra fast and tense. I'm not sure if he was just an awkward guy trying to make a move on a young girl or an actual human trafficker, but I got bad vibes. I was in a Target parking lot, just shut my door. It was like 9 p.m. I hadn't locked my car. A man wearing a red shirt suddenly showed up and waved at me, indicating to roll down my window. I thought for a second it might be an employee letting me know I forgot something or something like that. But then after a second I realized he was not an employee and was behaving erratic. I locked my doors, froze, and looked around. There was an actual Target, male, employee collecting carts right in front of me. He stared at me and didn't do anything. So I snapped back and peeled out of the parking lot. That employee did nothing, and while I understand self-preservation, it always bugged me. The guy at my window was dangerous 100%. He was being weird as hell. There's a lot more. I live in suburbia. Women's lives are hell sometimes.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.